Alright, YouTube, there's good news for common sense right now. Link in the description as always. Michigan's affirmative action ban upheld by Supreme Court. I'll read through some of this. Michigan's law banning the use of affirmative action in college admissions was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court Tuesday in a case that raised thorny questions over race and remedies. Not really. When you just say, we're all Americans, it doesn't really matter what your racial background is or whatever. The 6-2 ruling reversed a lower court's 2013 ruling that the voter-approved affirmative action ban violated the Constitution's equal protection guarantees. 3 justices in the majority, Chief Justice Roberts, Justices Anthony Kennedy, and Samuel Alito, concluded that the lower court did not have the authority to set aside the law. They're right. Affirmative action is not equal protection. It's unequal protection. By definition, all it does is give preference to minorities simply because they happen to be minorities. I pointed this out in the comments section too. What this says, this isn't the 1950s, by the way. This isn't the 50s or the 60s. The Klan is not running around the Deep South hanging people. You don't have a lot of the same issues and problems with the general population being ultra bigoted against these minority groups that you did in the middle of the 1900s. It simply doesn't operate that way anymore. What affirmative action does is essentially insult minorities and say, well, we don't believe that you are capable of competing with white individuals, or in many cases white male individuals, on an equal playing field. You need special help because you are a redskin or black or whatever. It's insulting. I'm part Native American. I could have attempted to get tribal membership if I had wanted in the Abenaki tribe, and I could have used that to get all sorts of affirmative action goodies. And I probably could have gone to Harvard, and I could have shown up the first day wearing a leather tunic with my hair braided and a tomahawk in my belt, and started screaming about privilege, and drinking firewater, and doing other liberal-friendly stereotypical things that Injuns are supposed to do. I've had people who knew that I was part Native, who are socially Marxist, multiculturalist, leftist, whatever term you want to give, it's different groups within this, who have asked me things like, oh, so you know how to make fire with sticks, and do you know about Native magic and all of these things? Yes, I do know about Native American spiritualism. Yes, I do know about shamanism, whichever, you know. I'm not full-blooded redskin, so I can't pronounce some of these difficult words and talk about the Great Spirit accurately all the time. It's insulting to me. First, because I'm also part white, so, you know, part Anglo-Saxon white. You know, the natives may have come over from Europe in many cases too, if you look at the Solutrean hypothesis. That's how the liberals would flip out if that was ever proven to be true. I also identify myself as white. I don't care about these things. I have a casual interest, but you're not going to see me trying to move to a reservation and spend my day drinking firewater and running a casino or any of these things. I would say that the real Native Americans have already integrated with American society. They consider themselves American first and foremost. They might have Native tendencies. They might, you know, celebrate a few Native festivals or rituals, and they might like nature and so forth, but they're not living on a reservation eating peyote all day. They're not, you know, praising the Great Spirit out in the desert well on mushrooms and doing all of these other stereotypical things like riding, you know, horses around and killing and eating buffalo raw and all of the things. The multiculturalists and the social justice warrior sort of pinheads. I hate to use that term because then people will assume I'm becoming a Fox fan, which I'm not. They'll assume that I'm some sort of vapid racist right-winger, even though I'm part redskin, firewater drinker, so to speak. These people seem to have this view of Native culture as sort of this noble savage culture, and that I'm some sort of traitor to the Native race by considering myself a white American or just a plain American. Like I'm supposed to walk around with a leather tunic chanting and mumbling to myself about the Great Spirit. It's insulting. The racists in this case, on this particular issue, are the left-wingers. And I've said that for some time. Even back when I considered myself marginally a liberal, I still found it odd that these people are stuck on this issue. And I realize that the political elite use it for votes and money. And they always have and they always will. They've done this since before segregation even ended. Well, we're the party, we'll protect the Irish people. Vote for us, by the way. Well, we don't like those stinking Irish people that are coming in. They're not really white, they're taking jobs. Vote for us if you're a good Protestant. It's the same thing. It's a wedge issue that's being used for money and political power. Affirmative action is insulting to minorities. It's also deeply, I would say, affirmative action is unconstitutional when you really think about it, because it's dividing people according to race or creed or gender and giving them differential treatment on employment, on education, and on all sorts of other things, specifically based on the fact that they happen to belong to that race. It doesn't take into account their individual standing. What about a black person whose parents are both Harvard PhDs, who make over $1 million a year between the two of them, who has a 160 IQ, who graduated top in their state? Do they need affirmative action to get into a college? Of course not. What about some white person who's being raised by two high school dropout trailer trash parents, both drunk individuals and brewing meth in their closet, who dropped out of middle school? Do they need affirmative action? Well, yeah, they probably do need help getting a higher education, getting a job. It's not about race. In fact, the same leftists who act like they're not taking into account the individuals, so they're looking at the aggregates, the aggregate IQ, the aggregate attainment and unemployment and so forth. The same leftists that are looking at groups as aggregates and stereotyping the individuals based on the average of a group will in turn scream bloody murder if anyone else does that with crime statistics. Because then a case could be made for racism if you were using that. Of course, I look past both. I don't particularly care. What happens is this. Affirmative action comes about. And the first wave of individuals that it affects positively because it gets these minorities better training, better job skills. It's a good thing, essentially. And this is what you saw in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when affirmative action, probably, even if it wasn't constitutional, it did a good job anyway. That doesn't mean it's acceptable. It still should have been ruled unlawful, but it did have its uses. Now what you have, though, schools and employment centers in minority-heavy areas no longer feel accountable to use their funds appropriately to actually help the minority community. Because they know, with affirmative action at work, they don't need to. It doesn't matter if people aren't being prepared for jobs or prepared for college in these minority areas because there's affirmative action. It doesn't matter. They can still get into college. They can still get preferential hiring, and they don't feel accountable for the proper use of federal and state funds. What happens then? Well, they're not actually preparing these people, so these minority groups, they go off to college, they get into the workforce, and they have no clue what they're doing because they haven't been given the proper training. They drop out. Why do you think the dropout rates are so much higher among certain minority groups? It's because they are being underserved by employment and educational facilities that are not properly using their funds to train these individuals. Affirmative action creates a cycle. It's lowering the attainment of the minorities. And then these same pro-affirmative action people see the dropout rates. And they say, well, we must need more affirmative action because dropout rates are holding steady, or they're rising in some cases in some areas. The crime rates are high. We need more affirmative action, not less. If we get rid of it, things will just fall apart. No, if you get rid of it and you hold these centers accountable for using their funds properly and you treat everybody equally as Americans rather than saying, well, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're native, this person's female, this college caters to females or whatever. If you treated them all equally and made equal funds available, you would not have that problem. Everyone would be on an equal playing field. And these schools that have been failing the minority population would no longer be able to fail them. They would end up getting attacked by the political structure if they did, because there's no longer any real reason they shouldn't be using those funds correctly. And the politicians do the same thing. Some politicians running for re-election. Well, don't worry, minority community. Here's some money from pork barrel politics, courtesy of the taxpayers. Vote for me. I'm the one that supports you because I'll give you handouts. So they vote him in. They get into office. Magically, the money doesn't do anything to help the community. Oh, well, you can blame my opponent for that because, my opponents are so anti-black, so anti-native, so anti-Hispanic, so anti-whatever wedge issue subdivision that you've artificially created to get votes in the first place. Well, it's my opponent's fault. Don't blame me. It's not my responsibility. I like the dark-skinned people, or whatever. I like the Asian. I like people who eat cats, or whatever. Ironically, these same people, the Al Sharptons, the Obamas, all of these people, and it doesn't matter what racial minority or ethnic minority or gender minority so-called or whatever that they're catering to, they do not care about the minorities. They only care about their votes. They care about their votes, they care about their money, and that's all. Because these people have been trained since birth almost in many cases, because all of these people are filthy rich. They look at people as numbers on a tax sheet or on a voter registration form. They don't care about you, they don't care about me, they don't care about anybody but themselves. They don't care whether minorities have higher unemployment. They're actively seeking to keep that unemployment rate high, to keep using it as a wedge issue, through things like affirmative action. And by the way, the educational system in this country is broken not just for minorities, but for everyone. Why do you think that private schools and homeschooling are becoming more popular right now? It's because of things like No Child Left Behind, courtesy of Bush, who is the furthest thing from what you want managing an educational system, because he can't even speak English. People living in the middle of Uganda speak better English than somebody like Bush. He was a moron. Or Common Core. These programs are destroying the educational system. They are knocking down the standards for testing and for attainment nationwide. Not even just for minorities. What they want is a population that's completely crippled and mind-numbed and ignorant. Because ignorant people are much more easily led into these little wedge issue voting blocks. It's probably to counter things like the internet. The internet, I think, has made people more intelligent largely because it allows people to exchange information instantly over great distances. But no, it's good that affirmative action is now on the ropes. It should be done away with nationwide for all intents and purposes. It should be banned utterly, and people should be treated equally. It's not an issue of male or female American. It's not an issue of gay or straight American, or black or white American, or Native American, or Hispanic American, or Irish American, or Italian American, or any of these other little subgroups that people create. These are artificial groups. They do not matter. We're Americans. We should all be treated equally. I think that people should also be equally pissed off that the government keeps trying to subgroup them into these little cliques, into these little parties for their own voting benefit, to gain votes, to get more money, and to keep people fighting one another so they don't fight the idiots that are running the country into the ground. The country is going downhill right now. It's not going downhill because people are gay, or because people are anti-gay, or because there are black people, or white people, or native people, or whatever. Or because men and women can't always get along. They're feminists or they're misogynists or whatever. These aren't the reasons why the country is going downhill. These are simply symptoms of a sick political structure that's been designed around the notion of splitting people into subgroups for votes. It's a symptom. It's not the actual disease. The disease is corrupt politics, cronyism, bad campaign finance laws, things like that. The fact that we now have virtual monopolies operating this country that have sprung up since the trust buster era, and there's no longer real capitalism in the country. It's corporatism. It's cronyism. It's the unions and these big corporations hold all the power and nobody can compete with. They're not experiencing competition. There's no reason for them to raise their wages or hire more people or not move jobs offshore. The political structure in DC is crippling this country. And it will only stop when Americans stop looking at each other as, well, that dude over there is a gay American. That dude's a black American or a white American. he's male Americans versus female Americans. No, you're all Americans. Let's get into the melting pot together a bit and realize that really the enemy are a tenth of 1% of the population, which is essentially the federal level politicians and higher level bureaucrats that are fucking the country up with their regulations and their rules and their militarized police and their surveillance state and all these things. Because as long as people are pacified with the sort of football team mentality of us versus them, and they see each other as gay or straight or black or white or male or female or a Christian and atheist and all of these other little groups that have been created, as long as they're going after each other, they're not spending nearly as much time educating each other on how bad DC is and how bad all of these, the corruption in the government is. Now, look at me. I'm ostensibly white. That doesn't mean that I have to go around saying, well, hang the black people. I don't care. I'm straight, but that doesn't mean I have to go around condemning gay people. I'm certainly not a Christian, and I do dedicate some of my time to attacking Christianity. But ultimately, those Christian individuals that are living in this country are still my fellow Americans. I may not agree with their religion, I may think their politics suck, but they're still Americans, and I would much rather side with them than some idiot in DC who just wants my vote by going and saying, well, maybe we need to tone down the Christianity. Well, that alone isn't going to make me vote for you. You're still probably very rich and very moronic. People need to realize that. Once we realize that, then we can have a real awakening and really solve the problems in this country. Right now, we're just bandying around these stupid wedge issues that are utterly meaningless at the end of the day. They mean absolutely nothing. And they just serve as a distraction from the problems going on in DC. And affirmative action is one of the most long-standing wedge, incorporated wedge issue sort of scams that's been propped up by both sides, by the way. Because the right wing, in attacking affirmative action, often drags in race and says, well, it's unfair to whites. No, it's unfair to everybody. It's unfair to whites because it's discriminating against them. It's unfair against the minorities themselves because it's insulting to them. Giving affirmative action to people is essentially saying you're too ignorant to compete on your own. We think you need a hand. And you're saying that to people who in some cases are rich themselves. They're wealthy, they're educated, and they're still getting affirmative action goodie handouts, and it insults them. And in a way, it also convinces some of these people they don't need to do things themselves, which is almost antithetical to the way that this country was founded. Affirmative action needs to die quickly and be forgotten. A lost chapter in American history dedicated to the bad old days. It would be great if this would become national and it were done away with altogether. And doesn't simply become another wedge issue like gay marriage or something, where it's a patchwork of states, some are for it, some are against it, and again, they keep using it for their damn votes and money. It's the same thing. You're an American. Some of the people watching this video are in other countries. In this country, we're supposed to be Americans. We're not supposed to be African American or Asian American or straight American or Native American and all of these sub-American groups. We're just Americans. That's what we are. And it has really crippled, it has really harmed our country that we have so many wedge issues going on. Ultimately, I hate the government at this point in its corruption and decadence a hell of a lot more than I could hate any racial or ethnic group, regardless of how racist or sexist I was. I would still hate DC a hell of a lot more. And I wish more people had that view. Even if they are bigots, they should get past it at least long enough to go after DC. Because DC is a much bigger problem right now. And it's pretty sad that since about the year 2000, and you could argue long before that, you could replace most of Congress and most of the presidents we've had, most of the bureaucratic heads, with inanimate objects who can't do anything, and they would have done a better job than in their current form. That's about all. Peace out.